Hi, my name is Anya Pandita, and today I'm going to be going in depth explaining the James Lange theory of emotion. To begin, here's a little background on different theories of emotions. So different theories emphasize different aspects of emotion, so they may emphasize the subjective experience, physiological arousal, or early expressive behavior. All theories have been influential in the direction of emotional research, and they've all been impactful since day one. So for example, the first theory of emotion proposed by William James over a century ago, which is going to be the theory that we're focusing on today, is still influential in our psychological research. So as I just said, we're going to be discussing the James Lange theory of emotion, which can be introduced by asking the question, do you run because you're afraid, or are you afraid because you run? So William James was a scientist that believed that body signals triggered an emotional experience. So signal examples are physiological signals and muscle feedback that are involved in behavior. So Danish psychologist Lange proposed a similar theory around the same time as James. And together, these two men believe that if you're in a tense situation, with your heart pounding, if your hands are sweating, all of these things are what make you scared. So these body reactions thus create a subjective feeling of fearfulness. Or more generally, they believe that emotion follows in this sequence. First, you perceive the stimulus. Next, your physiological and behavioral change occurs. And lastly, the particular emotion that is associated with these changes is felt. Thus, they believe that if a person were cut off from feeling body changes, they wouldn't be able to experience true emotions, and that instead they would feel something called like a cold emotion or more intellectualized emotion. So some did not agree with this theory. So Walter Cannon is a scientist that challenged the James Lange theory, and his argument was that body reactions are so similar for different situations, yet our subjective experience may vary. So an example of this is that fear and rage both are associated with an increase in heart rate, and obviously the emotional experience afterwards is different. Cannon also argued that our emotional reaction is often quicker than our physiological reaction. For example, like you may be so in shock from an event that you feel fear, but only after you get a hold of the situation does your heart begin to pound or your palms begin to sweat. He claimed that it may take several seconds for physiological changes to be triggered by the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, and he also pointed out that artificially inducing these physiological changes doesn't result in the subjective experience or emotional response that the scientists before say that would occur. So, for example, Spanish psychologist Gregorio Marañón injected subjects with epinephrine. So these subjects reported that their heart began to beat faster after the injection, and they felt like they should be feeling a certain emotion, but they never actually felt it. Furthermore, Walter Cannon challenged James's idea that if you cut off body changes, you wouldn't feel any emotion by disabling the sympathetic nervous system in cats and putting them in the presence of dogs. And once in the presence of dogs, cats still reacted with the same cat-like rage associated with this, so they were hissing, growling, lifting paws to defend themselves. And also, he discussed that in humans, as the sympathetic nervous system operates via the spinal cord, he argued that any spinal cord injury would cause the person to experience decreased emotional activity. But after recording data from people that have suffered these injuries, he reported that they said that they either experienced heightened intensity or no change in regards to their experiences of fear, anger, grief, sentimentality, and joyfulness, and among other emotions. And though there's a lot of arguments against the James Lange theory, researchers actually keep finding support for many of James's key points. So, for example, Antonio Damasio and colleagues studied brain activity and found that certain emotions produce distinct patterns of brain activity. So PET scans showed that areas of the brain's somatosensory cortex, which is responsible for processing sensory information from the skin, muscles, and internal organs, were activated during certain emotional experiences. So these changes were registered before the person reported feeling the emotion, and this supports the idea that physiological change occurs before a subjective feeling is felt. Furthermore, a study by Hugo Critchley also supports the James Lange theory by showing that participants that are more sensitive to internal body signals were more likely to experience anxiety and negative emotions, which goes again supporting the idea that emotion is a response to a body signal. And lastly, the facial feedback hypothesis research supports this theory, as it says if you express a certain emotion, like if you fake smile or fake sadness, it can cause the subjective experience of the emotion to occur. And that's all for this video. Thank you for watching.